Hey, I'm Jessica Eddy. I'm the author of the blog that you're on, and I just wanted to talk about inclusion a little bit in the classroom. I have been teaching for 13 years, and 12 of those have been in an inclusion classroom where I'm the general education teacher and I have special education support, whether it is another teacher or a paraprofessional that comes in to support my special ed students. One of the things that I want to talk about the most is how I do inclusion in the classroom, how I view it. I've done a lot of research, and the research is showing that a lot of times inclusion kids feel like they can't do the work or they don't fit in with their classmates or they get frustrated because it's too hard. In a study by Wang in 2019, that was exactly what the kids described as frustration, being in a gen ed classroom as a special ed student. And as general education teachers, that has to be our first mission, is to make them feel as though they can perform in the way that we need them to, and to help them to get to the point of mastery. Another one of the researchers that I have been following is Tremblay, and he did a study in 2013 that talked a lot about the two models of special education, one being inclusion, which is what I am used to, and the other being a self-contained or pull-out class in the resource classroom, where your special education students are pulled out and they are taught privately and separately from the general education students. In the study that he did, he found that there really was no significant difference in the data of the students, whether they were inclusion or the resource classroom, which is interesting to me because from my experience, I have seen that inclusion allows the special education students to glean and to hear the discussion from the gen ed kids that helps them to match the content, or at least the general education students can model how to approach a problem or how to approach a skill, and how to build on what they already know. So I think in my experience, it has been helpful for them to be in the general education classroom, at least with the support of the general education teacher and the special education teacher working together. One of the biggest ways that I feel as a teacher that I am able to support my special education students is through differentiation. So I'm going to talk about the application of what I have kind of learned and what I've researched, and just from my own experience, what I think is the easiest way to help our special education students within the gen ed classroom. Like I said, I've been an inclusion teacher for 12 of my 13 years. So I have learned a few things over the years. I've got some stuff to learn, I'm sure, but let me show you some of the things that I do. One of the best ways that I feel to differentiate for your special education students is through scaffolding and interleaving the work. One of the biggest goals for me is to have my special education students master the content and the standards to the level of rigor that's required, but it takes more time a lot of times with our special education students. They need a little more time and a little more support, a little more remediation and small group instruction. But one of the ways that we can do that is through scaffolding and interleaving. I have a couple of examples I'm going to show you to explain what that means. When you scaffold something, you're just giving prompts or hints or tips on how the student can approach the problem. And when you interleave, you're showing worked examples, or maybe you're starting the problem for them and then they have to come back and finish the problem. Any of those kind of things would be considered supports and using scaffolding and interleaving. So this would be, and you can use this, let me back up some. So I think one of the biggest things that teachers get overwhelmed with is the differentiation. I think teachers sometimes feel that they have to have all these different centers and different workshop stations that are all leveled for each individual student. But I think that there is simplicity in giving every child the same assignment, but using the scaffolds and the interleaves to do that. So I'm going to show you in my math class, I use the Georgia Frameworks. The Georgia Department of Education puts out math tasks. I like to use those a lot. So I'm going to show you some of the levels, the way that I would differentiate from my students. So this would be my above level. So this is the basic framework task, and then I added in a little open-ended response question at the bottom for my higher level learners. So this will challenge them and push them to the next level. It says the skill is to take the tenths and hundredths as fractions and decimals, and then to be able to put them into the grid to model that, and then give the equivalent hundredth if it's already in the tenths form. So my open-ended says to write each answer as a decimal fraction and to simplify your fraction, and then explain if possible. So the students have to take it just a step further for your higher level kids. Then this would be my on level. So here you can see where I've kind of scaffolded and interleaved just a little bit. My on level, I've kind of shown them that they need to take the 2/10 and create the equivalent hundredths in order to model the hundredths grid down here. And they have to do that for each of those numbers. So just a little bit of prompting there. And then for my special education students or my struggling students, I went ahead and showed them the equivalent hundredth fraction. And then they will have to create the model for those fractions as well as give me the decimal, like the directions tell. And this would most likely be completed in a small group to get them started. I still want my special education students to be pushed to self-discover as much as they can. So I'll give them a few minutes to try to decide how the hundredths and tenths are related to this diagram that they're going to have to shade in the fractions or decimals for. So they would be pushed to just self-discover that that is 100 little cubes, which is the same as a hundreds flat that they have seen multiple times at this point. So a little more interleaving. So this is another way that we could differentiate and scaffold, or a similar way but different activity. Here's one where they're lining up their decimals to compare decimals. And this would be one of the first activities that I give to the students after we've done a little bit of whole group instruction. So first, this would be my on level or above level. The students who kind of have a good grasp on this, it's just the basic framework task. Again, it's the Georgia Department of Education, their frameworks that they post for teachers. They have to take the decimals and line them up based on their order and then place them like least to greatest, and they have to place them on the number line. And there are some follow-up questions. It says, write to explain how you know the decimal numbers are placed correctly. So they have to explain that. This would be for my on-level students. Just gave them a little prompting. I scaffolded it just a little bit. I gave them the line to line up their decimal numbers. That way when they start to compare, they can decide which place value to start with. It just kind of helps them see the place values a little better. And then I went ahead and labeled their number line with the whole numbers. That way they just have to go back in and decide where to put the decimals or fractions. And then down here for the open-ended, I said the decimals are placed correctly because first let's just kind of give them a prompt of how to get started on their explanation for that one. Okay, so then for my special education students, like I said, you want to make sure you're maintaining the integrity of the standard while still giving them the support that they need to be successful. So to do that, to apply the differentiation here, I just scaffolded it a little further. I went ahead and lined their numbers up for them. I gave them the prompts to make sure they check the ones place first. They need to understand that the whole number, the ones place, is still where you're going to check first, and you go backwards down your place values to decide which one is greater. So I lined them up, and then they just have to decide the order. I gave them the whole numbers. They're going to try to find the place value, the places to put each number in between there. And then I gave them a little more simple sentence starters, first I, then I. So I kind of gave them where to start and telling them they need to tell me where they started and then where they went from there. Okay, so another way that you can differentiate for your special education students is through changing the task a little. So exemplars are, if you don't know what exemplars are, it's a math program that's put out that they provide word problems that challenge students and take them to the next level. And they have to problem solve and make connections and all these different things that go into one problem. So here's what I would give. Just created this little tree map to give to my regular education students. And you can see they have to problem solve, they have to provide a reasoning and proof, they have to communicate their thinking with words, they have to make a connection, and then show some kind of representation, typically with a diagram and key. So then I would take this and I would break it down to something a little more simple to understand for my struggling students, such as my special education students. So still using a thinking map, my brace map, to help the students kind of organize their thoughts and prompt them of what to do next. But instead of saying problem and solution, I put solve. And instead of saying proof and reasoning, prove your answer, and then explain your thinking, and can I make a connection, and then draw a diagram and key. So just a little easier way for those kids to not get lost in the verbiage of the assignment, and to make sure that they're still covering all of those things. And again, I really do believe, and I apply in my classroom, the idea of small group instruction for your special education students. They're going to need that extra support, and that's why that extra help is in there, like your special education teacher or parapro. So lots of different suggestions on how to apply the idea of inclusion for your special education students. Again, you're going to want to differentiate and scaffold and pull in the extra support that you have, all while maintaining the integrity of the standard to the level of rigor that it should be and is suggested. Thanks so much.